Hello and welcome to my channel EVS Edu. I welcome you all in today's lecture, that is Threats to Biodiversity. As we know, in the previous lectures we have discussed about what is biodiversity, what are various values of biodiversity, and different services provided by the diversity. Today we will talk about the different threats to biodiversity. My dear friends, the biggest reason for the current increase in the extinctions is primarily habitat loss. Destruction of tropical forests, coral reefs, estuaries, marshes, and other biologically rich ecosystems threaten to eliminate thousands or even millions of species in a human-caused mass extinction that could rival those of geologic history. By destroying habitat, we eliminate not only prominent species but also many obscure ones of which we may not even be aware. Technology makes it possible for us to destroy vast areas even faster than in the past. Dear friends, let us begin this lecture with the drivers that changes biodiversity. Okay, when you try to define this driver, what a driver is, you must know that a driver is any natural or human-induced factor that directly or indirectly causes a change in ecosystem which results change in biodiversity. So these drivers are of two types. Number one, direct drivers, and number two, indirect drivers. Direct drivers that explicitly influence ecosystem processes, which include land use change, climate change, invasive species, overexploitation, and pollution. Similarly, indirect drivers such as changes in population, particularly human populations, incomes, or lifestyles, operate more diffusely by altering one or more direct drivers. Indirect drivers, where we talk about the change in the human populations, that means one change is that rising of human populations, that population explosion. Utilize as we have talked in the direct drivers, that land use changes when the human population increases. These make encroachments in the forest and convert the forest land into agricultural land, horticultural land, or agricultural land into horticultural, where from they grab different incomes and their lifestyle changes. At the moment their lifestyle changes, and they create multiple impacts on the various ecosystems for harvesting, for production of crops, and for harvesting of different other products and goods. So this is the graphical representation of drivers of change and pressures. Here this graphical representation indicates that how drivers changes the ecosystems and create pressures which becomes the reason of declining the biodiversity. When we talk about the that how biodiversity change with the different demands, or first of all we must know one phenomena, that on one side there is the growth of population day by day, and with this growth of population, patterns of the consumptions changes. Not only changes, but these patterns of the consumptions increased. When we compare the 2 decades of a single family, where we talk about a population of having four members, they have a consumption, they have different one consumption rate. When this population after a decade increases from 4 to 8 or 4 to 10, the population pattern of consumption also changes. With this, the growing population and change in the patterns of the consumption, it leads increase the demand for ecosystem services and energy. That is considered the most driver that affect biodiversity, and this driver leads the different impacts on the biodiversity. Here we will talk about one that is direct impact on ecosystem and genetic resources. Another one, these drivers result in the pressures in terms of habitat loss, pressures in terms of competition, pressures in terms of introduction of the alien species, and pressures in terms of pollution and climate change and other purposes. And the multitude result of these direct impacts as well as these pressures which change the ecosystem, which in turn change the biodiversity, is the final stage is the decline in the biodiversity. Okay, moving ahead, let us talk about the different threats to biodiversity, which include habitat loss, hunting and poaching, man-wildlife conflict, introduction of invasive species, overexploitation, climate change, and other potential threats. First of all, let me explain how habitat loss threatened the biodiversity at greater extent. Or we can say that habitat loss is the biggest threat to the biodiversity. Okay, habitat loss can be described when an animal loses their home. Every animal in the animal kingdom has a niche and live in their animal community, and not a single life form can survive without their habitats. Here, this is the classification that how habitats get lost. These habitats become fragmented, disturbed by primarily two types of disturbances. One is natural disturbance, and another is anthropogenic disturbance. When we talk about the natural disturbance, it includes natural fires or wind or any kind of natural calamity, for example, volcanic eruption, or we can say the different natural events, floods, droughts, prolonged rainfall failure, etc., and so on and so forth. And under the anthropogenic disturbance, we are talking about the land use changes, clearance of the natural vegetation, conversion of the ecosystems, encroachment of the humans into the various fragile ecosystems, or conversion of the water sources into the land masses, etc., and so forth. There are the reasons that when a habitat gets lost by these disturbances, either natural and anthropogenic disturbances. When we talk about, as I already told you, that under the natural disturbances, when we are talking about the volcanic eruptions, yeah, or we can say glaciation is one more example of the natural disturbances, which becomes the reason for the habitat loss, or protracted periods of rain or drought. While such natural processes in the past had no doubt led to the extinction of flora, the resulting new environmental conditions has also resulted in the evolution and speciation of new flora and migration of floral elements. Similarly, different anthropogenic disturbances, which are the reasons of habitat loss, or we can say habitat fragmentation or habitat degradation, as here we cite two major examples: land use change, clearing of vegetations. Land use change, it, as I already told you, conversion of ecosystems, conversion of one ecosystem into another, or here a broad term that clearing of natural vegetation for development purpose, for construction of the roads, for construction of some another things, or this clearing of vegetation by burning of slash burn, which is locally known as jhum cultivation. Similarly, we have commercial exploitation. Sometimes we clear certain vegetation, for example, if it is medicinal plants, for commercial exploitation, industrialization and urbanization development, etc. And habitat with these multiple reasons, Habitats in different ecosystems at different places get lost, which leads a significant threat to the entire biodiversity of that very place. And this habitat loss threatens the biodiversity at each level. Either it may be on the local level, it may be on the national or global level. This habitat destruction is currently ranked as primary cause of species extinction worldwide. Habitat loss thus an adverse impact on wildlife as it leads to the loss of an environment which provides them food and breeding grounds or nesting sites to facilitate rearing of their young ones. Widespread habitat loss all over the country, or we can say all over the globe, has diminished the populations of many species, making them rare and endangered. In our race for progress and prosperity, we have disturbed the delicate balance of nature. Look at these pictures. These different pictures depict the various habitat losses due to the natural as well as man-made activities. Moving ahead, let's talk about hunting and poaching. Dear friends, poaching is the hunting and harvesting, taking of wild plants and animals. This poaching is basically tapping or trapping such wild animals or plants through different purposes and through different processes like hunting, harvesting of plants, fishing, or tapping of plants as well as animals. Uncontrolled hunting of wildlife for pleasure, such as food, furs, sickness, horns, tusks, etc., pose a serious threat to the survival of wildlife. In India, the illegal trade in the animal skin has been responsible for the destruction of a large number of tigers, leopards, deer, fishing cat, crocodiles, and snakes, as well as birds with beautiful plumage. Here are different pictures which depict the different poachings at different places with different animals. For example, here this is the poaching of tiger for because of its chicken horns of deer. This is the elephant tusks, rhino horn, crocodile skin, and shoe made from the snake skins. Okay, let's moving ahead with the another threat that is known as man-wildlife conflict, and this type of threat is observed at almost at each level and at each region. Man-wildlife conflict refers to the interaction between wild animals and humans and the resultant negative impact on people, resource, and habitats. Human such interactions, man wildlife conflict, or you can say human wildlife conflict, occurs when growing human populations overlap with established wildlife territories, creating competition for space and resources. Human population growth and the resultant destruction of wildlife habitats for human habitation and economic prosperity create reduction of resources or life to some people and wild animals. Conflict takes place in many forms, including but not limited to loss of life or injury to humans and any wild animal, depredation of livestock, and degradation of habitats. This man wildlife conflict is a global issue at present in urban and rural landscapes alike. Now, let us talk about some causes of this man-wildlife conflict. First and foremost cause is declining habitat of tigers, elephants, rhinos, and bear due to shrinking of forests. Here is an example. Second is when these forests get shrinked, or we can say when the habitat get destroyed or lost, there is a result that is insufficient food supply, and which becomes a cause of man-wildlife conflict. Another cause is encroachment of wildlife corridors and the exploitation of forests and wildlife resources for commercial purposes. And dear friends, let's talk about the man wildlife conflict in India. As per the government record, the loss of 1713 human lives due to the human elephant conflict, besides 373 cases of unnatural elephant deaths between the year 2015 to 2018. While during this era, property worth millions are damaged. In 2017 alone, 227 people were killed by wild elephants in 16 states, with Assam having the highest, 86 cases. As far as tigers is concerned, tigers claim over 200 lives in the last 5 years. The leopards kill more humans in India than all other carnivores. Human-leopard conflict regions of the country are West Bengal, Maharashtra, Assam, and Jammu and Kashmir. These pictures which depict the man-wildlife conflict at different places of India. Like here, this is in the first picture, it is the conflict between the wild animal and that is elephant and man, tiger, similarly bear, crocodile, etc. This is the data of Jammu and Kashmir. It is yearly breakdown of injured and death patients due to the human-wildlife conflict, as per the Jammu and Kashmir Wildlife Department. This is almost data of one decade from 2005 to 2016. During this decade, the majority deaths recorded during 2015-16, that's 20, and the major injuries recorded during 2006 and 2007, that is 1139. These are the total number of patients, deaths, and injury patterns and wildlife involved in Jammu and Kashmir. Here, these are the various wild animals like black bear, leopard, red fox, monkey, and unknown. These are the total number of patients, and this is the total number of deaths. Like black bear, it creates 21 deaths, leopard 49 similarly, and this is the most common injury. Black bear usually give the injury at scalp and facial injury. Similarly, leopard attacks around the neck, etc. Pictures from the Kashmir region between the man-wildlife conflict. Okay, let's move ahead with another kind of threat to biodiversity, that is introduction of invasive species. An exotic or unnatural species can be any kind of organism that has been introduced to a foreign habitat. This introduction of invasive species can cause major threats to the native species, as they often become subjected to great competition for resources, diseases, and predation. When these species have successfully colonized in the area, they are already called invasive ones. Next to habitat loss, invasive species are ranked as the second biggest threat to biodiversity. The greatest threat that invasive species can bring is their capability to change as entire habitat. These species are highly adaptable and can easily dominate a certain area because many natural species survive only in a particular environment. They tend to displace it or worse or get perished. Now, moving over exploitation, which is one more threat to biodiversity. Overexploitation refers to the act of overharvesting species and natural resources at rates faster than they can actually sustain themselves in the wild. Because of this, species populations is put into the greater risk of reduction. Overharvesting, overfishing, and overhunting are some examples of overexploitation. Additionally, some species of living organisms find it hard to produce or to reproduce when their number is too small. So, as a population or an ecosystem continues to suffer from lower population diversity, the probability of getting wiped out completely when a natural disaster or other forces increases. With this, if the act of or exploitation continues, it can ultimately bring extinction to many species even if they still exist in the wild. One more threat to biodiversity is climate change. Climate change refers to the long-term and irreversible change that occurs in the Earth's climate. This increase in the temperature of atmosphere has major effects on the environment, such as the seasons, rising of the sea levels, and glacial retreats. The biodiversity of organisms are affected regarding their population, distribution, levels of ecosystem, and even the individual's morphology and function. Because of the increase in the temperature, organisms have already adapted by expanding their ranges in latitudes. Because of this behavior, many species populations have declined. Aside from this, many animals have exhibited changes in the timings of their physiological functions. Regarding the ecosystems, studies revealed that climate change has brought the expansion of many desert ecosystems and thus have effects on the function and services that ecosystem can provide. As far as humans are concerned, the increasing rate in the climate change imposes great threats for human security as the natural resources are becoming more and more limited. At present, global warming and climate change already have irreversible impacts on biodiversity, and these effects, if not mitigated, can lead to more. Last but not least, we have some other potential threats to biodiversity. Aside from the aforementioned threats, there are still a lot of drivers that may either directly or indirectly contribute to the loss of biodiversity. One good example of this are the epidemics and infectious diseases of wildlife such as Ebola virus disease, infectious brucel disease, and flu. This phenomenon does not only affect wildlife but also human health as well. Dear friends, you know that presently we are suffering from a pandemic that is COVID-19 pandemic that have lost a good number of humans over the global scale. As per the WHO report, at present time, globally There have been 3,77,04,153 confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 1,79,709,229 deaths reported by WHO. Watching this lecture. For more such kind of lectures, please subscribe, like and share my YouTube channel EVS Edu. If you have some suggestions or comments, please drop in the comment section. Thank you very much for your patience.